I had mentioned to you, I had said something about that, every plane change was a color change, and you said, well, that's what Cezanne was about.
Exactly. Because we were talking just before that about Monet wasn't trying to put up a bunch of impasto colors for the sake of impasto texture or whatnot. He was trying to get the vividness and the luminosity of the scene that he was looking at as accurately as he could. They had tube paints, but they had so much oil in them that he squirted his out on blotter paper and then had them put on the palette, and they were still like enamels. You look at those paintings up close and they got little strings running off the end of every brush stroke, which actually adds to the luminosity of the color. But then, like you say, Cezanne came along being a big fan of all the color, but he didn't like the dissolution of form. Just like Henry, we don't want to sacrifice the form for the light key. So Cezanne tried to figure out, okay, how can we have the form in color as well as the light in color? Because Pizarro was the first one to point out that the reason we can't go back to value painting is because the scientists have pointed out to us that the color of the light and the local color of the object are two totally separate things. So how can we possibly go back to painting the old way? So Cezanne tried to figure out a way to bring, as he said, bring form back to Impressionism. And the way he did that was by breaking his objects and his scenes, or his heads, down into the most elementary planes, which of course had been done in academic schools as far as in black and white, the planes for the volumes and stuff, only he tried to make them uniquely separate colors from one another and tried to get the modeling of the form in color instead of in values. Now, the reason most of his paintings come apart and don't look naturalistic to us, as Henry explained further on, and if we study for ourselves we can see that Henry was obviously right, is because Cezanne started with the variations. Cezanne started with the smallest variations and put down one variation and another variation on the white canvas. And so, he had all these hodgepodge of things. So he invented the idea of every plane change as a unique and distinctive color change.
And is that what Cubism?
Well, that's where Cubism evolved from, but they had a lot of stupid ideas like that Cezanne was trying to show all four sides of an object at the same time, which is total baloney. But Hawthorne comes along and realizes that the tradition of underpainting things with either a grayscale or a Venetian red earth scale of values was also obsolete. And so Hawthorne replaced the value scales underpainting with uniquely colored masses. Yes, there's shadow and there's light, but that's not light gray and dark gray. That's obviously a yellow and a blue. And so we replaced the old obsolete academic grisaille with uniquely colored masses. Then Henry comes along and says, that's all wonderful, but there's also form in the modeling of form. And hey, Cezanne had this idea of every form plane change is also a color change. So we've got the masses for our foundation, for our stability, that Cezanne didn't have. And by allowing the mass to dictate the quality, meaning the depth and the luminosity of the variation that goes on top of it, because that variation has to hold within its own mass. We can also model the forms in color as well as getting the light key through the color masses themselves. So as Henry said, we're standing on the shoulders of all the painters who came before us. They figured out this and they figured out this and they figured out this. Then the Impressionists came along and made grayscale obsolete because we see in color, and now we have the colors to reproduce our seeing. Cezanne comes along and says, oh yeah, we can model form in color too, although he never did it very well. Henry understood the point, the idea, the principle, and brought it into being through his own personal efforts. First one to do it. And then he comes along with the other ideas. Okay, we have unique color masses producing light and shade and the large volumes in space that are uniquely accurate to this specific light key. Now we can also model the forms in color holding within those masses. What else can we do? Well, once again, the focal planes, the focal points. Oh, we can compose in color. We not only can get the light key in color, we not only can model the form in color, but we can also do what he called three-dimensional color composition, which is composed from the ideas of color themselves. Not through drawing, not through subject matter, this, that, and the other, but through arrangements of colors themselves. And there's where Henry took color. The Impressionists figured out how to produce light keys. Cezanne figured out how to produce modeling in color. Henry figured out how to compose spatially in color relationships. And he understood that in order to do that and do it well, we have to study all those progressions we talked about on up to the point of setting up our arrangements, choosing our landscape, and as he told me, consider what we're seeing. Know what he called it, the power of selection. The composition is a matter of selection. We look out there at that landscape or that still life or that head, 1,000 different colors present themselves to the eye. Well, which ones are important? And not just important, but important to the idea that I want to express in this one painting. One painting, one idea. Not 20 ideas in one painting, but one idea. Out there amongst those 800,000 color notes that you can see, there are 50 that represent a single idea, express it best. And because my visual perception, meaning Henry's, is of such an acute nature, I recognize which ones those are, and now I will transfer them to my canvas or to my board. So he was composing in color by selecting out of nature, as Alfred East said, selecting from nature only those things most useful for the purpose at hand. Now that's where Henry took this ultimately, was to compose in color, not from the idea of masses or color modeling and whatnot, but from direct perception of what was important within this scene or this figure or this setup that would express one idea. Somebody asked him one time, Henry, how have you been able to do so many different paintings of your elm tree and none of them look alike? He said, because every time I would go out to do that scene, I would ask myself this question: what can I express this time that I've never expressed before about what I'm looking at? And that's composing in color, through ideas based in color relationships and nothing else. So the old man converged way off over here while everybody else was still going down that same road.
But getting back to Paul Cezanne, he never really ever taught me anything per se. I mean, by looking at his work, it's nothing that
unless
Henry would say, if you can't learn anything from it, or if I have to learn a complete different language to understand what you're painting.
But you don't, and I'm going to tell you how. You have to understand where Cezanne came from. You have to understand who Cezanne's teacher was who got him to understand this. It's Pissarro. Pissarro, one of the greatest teachers who ever lived. He taught Gauguin, Van Gogh, and Cezanne. The three of the greatest heroes of the supposed moderns were all taught by one man. And he led each one of them very differently. And he knew Cezanne, at the slightest shove, would run away and hide himself and wouldn't listen to anything. So Pissarro was very, very gentle with him, and they painted side by side for a lot of years. And Pissarro was not interested in the level of form that Cezanne was. But he did get Cezanne to understand that the forms that he was after had to be produced in color and not in values. So when you look at some of the paintings that Pissarro and Cezanne did side by side, some of the landscapes, and you see what Pissarro did and you see what Cezanne did, you start seeing the workings of Cezanne's mind. And once you see how his mind worked, you go, oh, now I see. And when we realized all Cezanne was trying to do is do a still life study in color plane changes of the forms, we say, well, yeah, I understand what he's doing. But because he was doing one note at a time, when he had run out of space over here, he'd just keep going, and so forth and so on, and that's why things look distorted. Or he would do as...
his proportions seemed to be off.
Yeah, and because he didn't care. He was after color notes. And he would also do things like this. He would take a bowl with 3 peaches in it, and take a stack of coins and put under the back of it so the bowl would be tipped up so he could see the peaches and see the inside of the bowl. He had unconventional setups. He had this old ratty piece of carpet that he would drape that would leave all these little canyons, and he would say this little bowl of peaches or his bottle up in that, and they were all tilted. And he would paint them just exactly the way he saw them, tilted up like that, because he wanted to see the inside of the bowl. So when we understand what the guy was doing with his color studies, we say, yeah, that some of these ain't that bad. And people say, oh, he was the worst draftsman in history. Well, he wasn't. To me, the worst kind of draftsmanship are the folks that are so anal with it that it's photographic. I mean, why bother when you can take a photograph of it? That's not draftsmanship.
That's right.
You know, and the value painters, and
that's what Henry used to say. If you want a picture, go out and take a picture.
Yeah.
If you want a painting, you do a painting.
Well, he also said, if you're that interested in form, go be a sculptor.
Right, exactly.
Because form through color is of a totally different nature than form through solid objects. So if a person was really attracted to sculptural form, which is what we're doing as color plane changes to create visual volumes, but it's not tactile or tangible, you should go off and do that instead. And where were we going with that? We're talking about Cezanne.
Just basically about his how you understood what he said, what he was doing when you looked at his work, and I mean,
and then you can appreciate it once you get,
But he ran into a dead end road to a certain extent. Well, and he didn't understand it the way Henry understood it.
He could only take it so far because he didn't understand light keys through masses, which is what Henry pointed out 1,000 times. That once you establish the light key with the masses.
Didn't Henry get that basically from Hawthorne? Because
he got that from Hawthorne.
Hawthorne was finally
figured
the
that out.
last 15 years of his life, Henry said. The last 15 years of his life, the way Hawthorne studied the last 15 years of his life was not the way he painted for commission paintings.
Exactly.
Because he painted tonal commission paintings.
He was trying to figure out the color.
But he was trying to figure out what Monet was doing.
Yeah, and when he figured out...
And he knew it was important to paint outside because of Shinnecock Studios and what Chase was saying, and what Chase had learned from Monet.
Yeah.
Okay? But it took a while to develop that to the point and analyze it.
Exactly, and until he was able to see that color could reproduce the volumes of masses and light, he had no way of teaching it. And actually, Henry was one that figured out how to teach all this, not Hawthorne. Henry figured it out mostly by himself through teaching Hawthorne's students. Because Hawthorne would demonstrate, but he wouldn't actually say, you ought to do it like this or you ought to do it like that. But once they figured out how to generate the true light keys through color masses, then there was a foundation to build color modeling of the forms on.
What I'm saying
and Henry brought that in all by himself. Hawthorne had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, but Henry built that on the Mudhead studies that Hawthorne developed.
Yeah.
So Hawthorne was the one that stepped through the threshold of understanding in that the masses and studying the masses. Okay, like he used to fuss at his students on that paper that's on the foundation website by Gilman that says that he used to come out and fuss at the students if they tried to draw because
there's no way to see that draw with all that light. Exactly. And he also
did that expressly so to see what they
And
would do.
Hawthorne also understood Cezanne's point that those 3 planes of the forehead are 3 distinctively different colors and not value changes. So he understood the principle and he even demonstrated the principle. But Henry figured out how to do it and how to teach it because Hawthorne died. Hawthorne may have, had he lived longer, but I've always wondered if Henry would have developed the way he did had Hawthorne lived longer. I don't think he would have. Because, he was a martyr for Hawthorne up for a long time. The first time I heard him badmouth Hawthorne, I was somewhat shocked. It was just me and him. And he was talking about it, and he started complaining, like, had he done this earlier and said this earlier and shown me this earlier, I would have understood a lot earlier. But the so-and-so, blah, 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 blah. He was great at this and this and this, but he wasn't really clear in his explanations, which is why Henry would go on for 2 hours trying to get you to understand something, because he didn't want to leave your mind in this type of confusion that Hawthorne left him in for so many years. Yeah.